which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. But for those of you who just joined us, this is the Building School Community Partnerships webinar in support of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. I want to welcome everybody and commend you for showing up on a Friday afternoon. I know that can be hard sometimes. Christina and I are really excited to talk to you about partnerships today. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll let Christina. My name is Susie Terry, and I am one of the 3 Hetac leads. I'm a homeless coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education.
And hi, everybody. I'm Christina Dukes. I am with Pearl Strategies. I am an independent contractor that works with the California Homeless Education Technical Assistance Center. And prior to starting Pearl Strategies, I was with the National Center for Homeless Education for many years. Thanks for joining.
So if this is your first webinar from the Hetac, just a little tiny bit about the Hetac, the California Homeless Education Technical Assistance Center is what that stands for. We are funded by the California Department of Education to serve as the state's Homeless Education Technical Assistance Center. The Hetac is a joint effort of the Contra Costa County Office of Education, Los Angeles County Office of Education, and San Diego. You can download the Hetac flyer to learn more about which Hetac, which county office serves your LEA, depending on what county you're on. And you can also find that really easily at our website. If you haven't visited the hetac.org website, I highly encourage it. We're going to talk about it a little bit at the end of this webinar in relation to today's topic. So about today's topic, the webinar today, as I mentioned, is on school community partnerships, and it's based on a brand new, newly developed toolkit that has just launched on the Hetac website for working together to serve children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness through partnerships. So we're going to cover key school community partnership topics around why it's important to partner, sort of making the case for partnership, whether you're an education institution or a community organization in the homeless response system, and then considerations for partnership, some strategies and some action steps around how to get partnerships going. We're going to do a little spotlight on a partnership that I participate in here in San Diego County, and then we're also going to have opportunities for Q&A and some discussion throughout. However, this webinar, I already mentioned, is being recorded. The webinar recording and the materials will be sent out to all the webinar participants following the webinar. It also will be posted to the Hetac website usually within a week of the recording, so you can find it there as well. In this webinar platform, all of you are muted. You are able to turn on or disable closed captioning, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom to submit questions, or you can put them in the chat. I'm completely comfortable with either, whatever's easiest for you. Sometimes I like the chat because everybody sees all the questions real easily, but you can definitely ask questions either way. Okay, all the housekeeping is done. I'm going to turn it over to Christina to get us started.
All right, so I'm going to walk us through the next section, which is making the case for partnership. Why are school community partnerships important? So we've got thoughts on that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have developed a school community partnership toolkit, right? But let's hear from you first. So please share via the chat. Why do you think it's important for schools and other systems like housing, homeless response, workforce, public benefits to partner in support of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness? Why do you think partnerships are important? share in the chat, and I'm going to look at your responses. Trisha, everyone has their own areas of expertise. Cheyenne, to provide families with as many resources as possible and to not duplicate services and fill in gaps. To bring more services to families. It takes a village. That's right. Seeing lots of great for collective impact and supporting children, youth, and families in a more holistic manner. Streamlining services, can't do it alone. Helping families build a network of support to increase capacity to better support students and families. Too many cooks in the kitchen can be overwhelming. These are all good. You can keep the chats coming. You're making lots of great points. So thank you for doing that. I'm actually going to go to the next slide and share our thoughts, but you can keep your thoughts coming. As we're going to explore today, partner programs and systems do differ, right? We're going to talk about some of those clashes where we align easily, where maybe we need to work a little harder to align. But the bottom line is there is common ground across school and community partners that can and should be found and leveraged, because no one system can meet all the needs of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. The education system is just that, a system that focuses on and excels at supporting the education of children, youth, and families, but it's not a housing system, and vice versa, right? And while schools can make referrals, you're not administering programs like childcare subsidies or TANF, right? Temporary assistance for needy families, or food stamps. So no one system can meet all the needs. We really do need each other. Also, research demonstrates the value of housing, education, and supportive services in preventing and ending homelessness. So no one system has a monopoly on the most important, right, or the single fix for solving the issue of homelessness. We need each other. If you're familiar with the Chapin Hall research, they report on what is called a bidirectional relationship, meaning housing stability affects educational attainment, and educational attainment affects longer-term housing stability by equipping a young person with the skills and credentials needed to secure living wage employment and make a sustainable exit from homelessness. So we see research demonstrating the value of supports across systems. Also, schools and community partners often work with the same children, youth, and families. You guys referenced that in some of your comments. We're working with the same children, youth, and families. Why not work together in a more coordinated way? And if you're not yet convinced of the importance of partnerships, many authorizing statutes require partnerships between school and community partners. So apart from our own view of how important they are, we have to support partnerships because we're required by statute. And then also many school and community partners have allowable usages of funds that are complementary or overlapping. As an example, under American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds, schools can contract with community-based organizations to help identify McKinney-Vento students and connect them to wraparound services. So there's just a lot of overlap in our work, and so working together makes sense. Again, if you're not yet convinced, one other source to share with you. What you're looking at on the screen are called the 4 core outcomes that are included in the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness framework to end youth homelessness. And what they said is, for communities to be ready to effectively prevent and end youth homelessness, these are the 4 core outcomes, or the 4 core needs that youth have. They need safe and stable housing, education and employment, permanent connections, and supports for their well-being. And again, no one system is going to be able to provide all of these at full scale. We really need each other to work together. Susie wanted to make sure we included this slide. When I worked at the National Center for Homeless Education, this is Susie's, right? I'll give Susie the credit here for making sure we covered this. When we would work with youth homelessness demonstration program communities, it was child welfare, it was homeless response, it was education, it was a lot of different systems. And I found myself needing to make a clear articulation of the role of education in partnerships, because along the left, you'll see that education can be a system level partner. And this was how most other partners viewed education initially. Like, we want you to be a part of system level planning, functioning, and coordination. Things like, we want education partners to be on our leadership bodies or on our advisory boards. We want you to contribute data on the prevalence of youth and family homelessness, the number of students you're identifying. So these are all system level functions, and that certainly is a part of partnership. But I really wanted to articulate it's not only important for the system of education to be part of partnerships, but we want the people that we're serving, the children, youth, and families that we're serving, to have access to education as a pathway. And that means providing youth level supports for educational access and success, because education's return on investment is well documented. So people with higher levels of education are more likely to have higher income. They're more likely to be able to afford housing. They're more likely to have access to employer paid benefits, and they're more likely to be employed. So again, it's not enough to just, or I would say, it's not enough just to invite education to be a partner at a system level, but we want to actually direct the efforts of our partnerships also to support education as a pathway for individual children and youth. Remember how I said, if you're not convinced, at least know what's required, right? So this is what is required. There are a couple of references. Actually, there are a number of references throughout. We've summarized them here on the screen in the McKinney-Vento Act. Quick reminder, in case you're joining us from a community-based organization, the McKinney-Vento Act, or technically the subtitle 7B, or the education subtitle of the Act, is the key piece of federal homeless education legislation. And it does require coordination and partnership. So for instance, state coordinators and local educational agencies must coordinate with a variety of partners, some of which are named in statute, to improve the provision of comprehensive education and related services to McKinney-Vento students and families. And also local liaisons. So at the local level, you need to be providing McKinney-Vento students and families with referrals to partners such as healthcare, dental, mental health, substance abuse, housing, and other appropriate services. And then our partners, in their statutory requirements, they also have provisions that require them to work with us or to focus on children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. For instance, think about the Federal Head Start Act or the Federal Child Care Development and Block Grant Act. There are certain early childhood program homeless provisions related to immediate program enrollment, prioritization for program enrollment, things like that. Also, the homeless response system has what are often referred to as the education assurances in the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing, or HARTH Act. So for instance, they are required to inform families with school-age children and support them in accessing McKinney-Vento education supports. And there are actually 4 total education assurances. That's just one of them. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act has collaboration requirements. It requires runaway and homeless youth programs to partner with the local liaison and the school district to come up with an education plan or a plan to keep youth that they're serving connected with education. And last but not least, our workforce partners. Under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, they also have requirements to make sure that in-school youth and even out-of-school youth experiencing homelessness are aware of and connected to workforce support. Now, though we could do entire webinars just on those 2 slides, like really deep diving, but just know, and we linked, right? Let's say you're like, okay, I want more information about what WIOA says. Like you can link to each of those to deep dive those if you want to see more information. We just wanted to, the take home point here is we all have requirements to be working together. If you're kind of like, all right, I'm just sort of dipping my toe in and beginning to think about school community partnerships, who are they? We want to remind you, tap into the full range of school and community supports. There are plenty of partners out there available. And again, once you get this slide deck, you're going to have access. Those links will actually take you to websites where you can find out who is your local rental assistance partner, who is your local public housing authority. Don't forget about your continuums of care, your child care and Head Start partners, your higher ed partners, your K-12 partner, your other K-12 partners, right? So Homeless Ed should be partnering with Title I, for example. There are some connectivity benefits out there, both for schools and individual households, food support programs under the child nutrition programs, and food stamps or SNAP, and other community partners like your nonprofits, your service providers, philanthropy, the faith-based community. Lots of options out there. I think, Susie, if we have time, hopefully at the end of the webinar, we'll show you the toolkit so you can see all the different modules. But one that I want to make sure that I mention to you, if you're just starting out with partnership, we provide a template for you to organize the names and contact information of your different partners across systems. And even there's it is an Excel spreadsheet. There is a sheet in there with lots of links, like here's where to find your Head Start folks. Here's where to find, so we really want to make it as easy as possible for you to find the folks you want to work with. All right, we are off and running. Wanted to check to see if we have any questions. Looking in the chat first, it looks like mostly those are comments.
And we just had one question in the Q&A, and Susie and I both responded, but it was a question regarding Title I Part A funding and what is that allowable? And so there, that information is on the Hetac website as well. So we do have a whole page dedicated to that.
All right, just want to give a few more seconds in case someone's typing a question. Don't be shy. All right, so seeing no other questions, I will hand it back to you, Susie.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit more just about starting to get into actual partnering and what that can look like. So this first slide just on what makes a strong partnership is ideally what a really good, strong partnership looks like. They don't always look this way in the beginning. Sometimes they get here, but just to give you guys an idea of a good, strong. So the first quality is really for it to be mutually beneficial. So all of the partners are receiving a return on their investment of engaging and spending time in partnership work. So kind of what that means is if you're getting invited, and this is, I don't know about all of you, but in my county, it has become common to get invited to meetings as an education person because a lot of places in the homeless response system want to be able to say, oh, look, we have education at the table. Like we invited education, they're at the table. And so I've shown up places where I feel like I'm really just there so they can check a box. But it's not a mutually beneficial partnership. So in an ideal world, like the partners are working together and all entities are benefiting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like and strategies for that coming up. But the second quality is really systematic, implemented via reliable, consistent, organized practices. So what that refers to is, especially like in larger communities or larger agencies, information being shared across organizations at all levels so that you're getting and sharing information consistently, no matter who answers the phone that day, or so that your partnership isn't specific to one person in the organization, but nobody else really has the information about what's going on, which kind of leads into the third quality, which is stability. Essentially, that if it really has been implemented systematically, then the partnership will remain strong, even if a leader at one of the agencies or one of the partners change over time. So if you have a really strong relationship with one person at an agency, but then when they leave that agency and take a different job, nobody else is really interested in partnering with you. So, so good, stable partnerships where information is shared. And then the last one is really just effective and responsive, being able to address the ongoing changing landscape of homelessness in your community with the students and families that you serve, with the needs of the partners. So you're continually evaluating together how you're working together and what you're addressing, and not not working off of possibly one conversation you had 4 years ago at a meeting that was before the pandemic even happened. And so really keeping up together with the changes and the needs. Christina, did you have a question?
No, sorry, I'm just
Oh, okay.
quickly typing in the chat.
Okay, I saw the chat and I was like, okay, wait, do I need to answer something? Okay, keep going. So we're gonna touch on this a little bit more in strategies, but at first, let's just establish that there are going to be differences between organizations that you partner with and education. It's really important to find the pathways to be intentional and to kind of find your champions, which I'm going to go into a little bit more, but there will always be cultural differences among systems, and they will always create certain challenges, but they can be navigated, especially if you are going into each situation with an open, intentional, goodwill attitude towards the other partners. And sometimes that can get hard. I mentioned earlier, like when you get invited someplace and then you feel like they're just trying to check a box, and that can make you feel not as much goodwill sometimes towards another partner. But there are ways to strategies to navigate that we're going to talk about. But I just want to establish at the start that yes, there are going to be some big differences that you have to coordinate in order to do good partnering work. The other thing that we're going to come back to the navigating strategies, but first let's just get a general idea of the two main systems and their differences, so that everybody kind of is aware of what I'm referring to when I keep saying these system differences. So mostly the two systems that we're referring to are the education system and the homeless response system. The education system is primarily focused on education. I think that's goes without saying for all of us. And our homelessness description, definition, and entitlements are all in the U.S. Department of Education's definition in the McKinney-Vento Act. So one of the main differences in education is that any student that is deemed eligible, that is identified as meeting the definition, receives support. So every student identified should be getting served. In the homeless response system, the primary focus is around housing, and their homelessness definition is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the HUD definition, which is different than the ED definition. And their supports are provided based on a prioritization on a vulnerability scale. So you're actually prioritized or triaged in some ways when you enter into the homeless response system. Not every person identified as homeless in that system necessarily gets supports or gets the same type or level of supports. Those are kind of the main differences between the two systems. The other main difference that I mentioned on the previous slide is the definition. I will say one of the main things that you hear when you talk about partnering or working with homeless response is that the two different definitions make it difficult to serve families, make it hard to navigate. I know when I first started working in as a homeless liaison, I knew it was clear to me from the start, like I think we're all kind of aware, there's these two different definitions. People talk about it a lot. But I didn't fully understand what the difference was. I knew my doubled up families didn't really qualify for services in the homeless response system under the HUD definition. But I feel like the more I actually took the time to sit down and look at the HUD definition and get familiar with it, I found that I started to be able to see where the definitions do overlap and where some of my families did fit into services depending on their circumstances. So really getting familiar with the HUD definition is a good place to start when you're entering into partnership, trying to partner in your community in the beginning. But essentially what you see on the screen are the different categories of homelessness in the two different systems. Most of you are probably familiar in schools. Under the ED definition, we categorize homeless students and families as unsheltered, sheltered, doubled up, or hotel motel. That's the data that gets reported and how it gets reported. And then under HUD, they have four designated categories of homelessness that are literally homeless, imminent risk of homelessness, homeless under other federal statutes, and fleeing danger. And folks are categorized in that manner, and then they are prioritized based on their category and within their category. So it's it's very different, but like I mentioned, if you really take a good look at the HUD definition, and you'll see it in the toolkit when we talk about the toolkit. It's helpful. It's helpful to be able to see like where you can partner and where families fit in. So I'm going to pause right there to see if there are any questions or if anything has come up. The grumpy cat. The definitions definitely make my brain hurt.
Lindsay, we had a couple of questions submitted in the Q&A. One of them said, is there a way for nonprofits to get added to the toolkit? And I wasn't sure if they meant toolkit in general or specific resources. Of course, we envisioned nonprofits as one of the partners in school community partnership work, right? I did want to point out that we, in the partner inventory, which is what we're calling the Excel spreadsheet we give you to help you find and organize your partner information, we include like early care and that little tabs at the bottom, early care and education, K-12, higher education, homeless response, and various partners. And we do include a couple of like placeholders, additional system 1, additional system 2. You could change that to nonprofit if you work with a lot of nonprofits. So there's flexibility in the toolkit for you to plug in what makes sense in your community.
And anyone has access to the toolkit because it's hosted on the website. So nonprofits can download some of the tools or access the information as well. I don't know if that was part of what was being asked.
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. So this is what I was referring to when I said we're going to get into a few strategies. So around navigating those two definitions and their different focus, again, I talked about engaging with intentionality and goodwill, trying to focus on where the opportunities are rather than the barriers. That definitely relates to, getting to know the definition and looking for opportunities. We talked about a bunch of them when you guys were just entering in, like why partner. It's important, especially if we're all in, have some role in the lives of these students, if we're working together in a coordinated way. So there's opportunity there. Choosing your language carefully, communicating value and respect, and then recognizing the challenges and some of the constraints faced by each partner and really just working together. One of the things that I noticed when I mentioned when I first started working in San Diego and trying to get out in the community and partner, I noticed that when I would go to a partner meeting, the homeless response system is filled with all different kinds of people. And some of them do just want you there so they can say they invited education, but there were other people in the room that would definitely show more interest or be nodding their head if I would say something about education. And I found it really helpful to sort of seek those people out and network with them, because through that, I was able to find what I refer to as my champions. So there are people in the homeless response system that would become education champions as well, that really got what I was trying to say, what Christina mentioned with the Chapin Hall research and the importance of education and homeless response working together. Everybody in the room isn't going to jump on board with that idea right away, but there are usually a champion or two in the room that you just got to look for and find your champions. And then again, exploring the definition overlap, looking at the definition, seeing where there are opportunities for overlap with families and seeking that flexibility where possible. For example, in category 2, which is imminent risk of homelessness, and category 4, which is fleeing danger. Those are sort of your opportunities for flexibility and overlap with some of your McKinney-Vento families, especially if you have a good relationship with a homeless service provider that will help you work with, that will ask you the right questions for how to get family services that they wouldn't otherwise be eligible for, or wouldn't sometimes know that they could be eligible for, because we don't expect our families to understand the definition either. Another strategy is to really look at leveraging any and all available funding. Funding is a common topic of conversation. And so looking for flexible funding sources. HUD isn't the only homeless response system funder. And so there are agencies in your communities that could be receiving funding from Runaway and Homeless Youth Act funds, which uses a different definition that's more broad and encompasses a lot of our homeless students. And then within California, there are state level funding sources like HEAP and HAP that have come out, college focused rapid rehousing, that have all used a broader definition. Some actually refer directly to the McKinney-Vento definition. So looking for other funding sources that you can access and access services from, and then blending funding where allowable. So my example of this is, because San Diego has a youth homelessness demonstration project grant, I was able to get a little bit of HUD funding actually into my program for a particular navigation service that we were able to offer for unaccompanied homeless youth. I blended that funding with my EHCY funding, my McKinney-Vento funding, so that I didn't have to worry about any student being turned away. We do have to obviously track like which students we're serving under which category and which definition, but at the end of the day, no student will be turned away from services based solely on a definition that I have to adhere to for funding. So blending funding can be really useful a lot of times and just take the worry out of it. I was very stressed about who we were going to be able to serve before I realized that I could blend my funding. And then just leveraging partner referrals. Connecting households, families to supports across multiple domains with an intentional approach to partner in referrals. So when you have your network, how are you leveraging that to get supports to families? That was one of the things I saw come up in the chat a lot earlier as well, when talking about good reasons to partner, is to be able to get resources to families. It's one of the things that homeless liaisons continue to report is the hardest part of their job, finding those referrals to get to families. And so having partnerships and those connections can really work to create an easier flow of referrals for families and getting them referred to all of the programs that can serve them. And again, there's a whole section on navigating the definitions in the toolkit that will show you the whole toolkit at the end, but there's a whole tip sheet in the toolkit around navigating the definitions and strategies. So we wanted to talk a little bit about considering partnership along a spectrum, because sometimes, especially in the beginning, I would hear about, like, you hear the phrase school community partnerships and you think like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't know how much time I have to spend on this. I'm the homeless liaison, but I'm also 3 other jobs at my district. And so want to make it clear that partnering doesn't always have to be a lot of work. There's sort of a spectrum where there's looser, sort of lighter touch activities at one end, and then moving all the way up to more formal and integrated activities on the other. So at the looser, lighter touch end, networking, something I mentioned a couple of times already, just where in my community, when I was new to the homeless liaison position, I just showed up. I showed up at meetings. I didn't know in the beginning, I didn't have a vision of what partnerships were going to look like, or if partnerships were even going to exist in my community. I just showed up to find out like who was where, who's at which meetings. I looked for my champions, but I essentially just networked. I got to know people, exchanged information with them, so that you sort of building your connections. And sometimes networking is the most that you have an opportunity to do in terms of creating partnerships. Cooperation is sort of a little step up from networking in terms of time and engagement, where you're more actively supporting one another's activities. You might not have a formal agreement in place, but you're supporting activities taking place in each other's organizations for a common purpose or a common goal. Collaboration is even like stepping up from that. You may have partners that you engage in mutual initiatives. You might modify some of your activities to benefit the whole of the coordinated activity, sharing or merging of resources to achieve a common purpose or create something new. And then collaboration usually takes place with a formal agreement in place, accomplishing sort of a shared vision with a concrete focus. It may include a contract with a community-based organization, an MOU, some sort of joint accomplishment. One of the things that took place in San Diego County around the YHDP program that I mentioned was some joint grant applications. So I partnered with community organizations to apply for that money together. That would be an example of like a more formal collaboration that took a lot more time and effort. There is a larger description of this spectrum that includes more examples and descriptions that you'll see in the toolkit. This spectrum right here is just a snapshot of it. And then I'm going to give you a couple of examples along this spectrum. So if we're talking about networking, we're just going to go through like a homeless focused example. So networking, an example of that would be the Pleasant Town School District Homeless Liaison meets the director for the Family Place Shelter at a homeless coalition meeting, and they exchange email addresses and agree that they should meet up for coffee to share about their work. Making that connection, building your relationships to other people. Maybe the Pleasant Town homeless liaison went to that meeting and realized that this shelter director seemed like a champion, seemed like somebody who saw the value in education. Those are the easiest places to start. And then if we take that up to cooperation, the example would be that maybe the shelter director realizes that he or she feels like their case managers should be more informed about the educational rights of students experiencing homelessness. So he invites the liaison to come to his shelter, come to his staff meeting, and share about McKinney-Vento and education rights and what they're doing at the schools. And it gives the case managers an opportunity to share with the liaison some of their experiences with the schools, that they've maybe had a hard time enrolling students, or what some of the barriers have been. And so it opens up that more cooperation around actually getting families enrolled from the shelter at the school. So moving up from that, an example of coordination for our homeless liaison and our shelter director, the shelter decides that it's going to create a designated homework room. They're going to have internet access, and make sure that there's a spot for young people at the shelter to be able to sit and do their homework. So they reach out to a local faith-based partner to see about donating tables and school supplies for the homework room. And the liaison makes sure that they are stocked with their district's homeless education brochure with instructions on how to refer students, with her contact information and everything that they need to know for enrollment. I think I saw Leanne on the participant list, so I'm going to say they probably also hung up the "You Can Enroll in School" poster at the shelter, making sure that families know about all their rights. And then at the collaboration level, this would be when the district and the shelter agree that they're going to coordinate referrals and some service delivery for the families in the district. So they enter into an MOU for work around how they're going to work together, how they're going to hold joint trainings at least annually, and how they're going to do referrals together and sort of streamline that. So that's sort of on the spectrum of partnering, the different levels, kind of using that same example. So we want to hear from you guys, share in the chat, like, what are some of your key partners, or have you found them? And how are those partnerships going? What, if you have an example of something that's going well or something that's been challenging? And we'll give you guys a couple minutes to enter that into the chat. I know some of you out there have some good partners. YHDP. YHDP can be a beast in a community for a number of reasons, but it definitely is a good catalyst for bringing school and community partners together.
I'm curious, Kirsten, do you mind sharing in the chat what YHDP community you're with? I know a number of continuums of care in California have been funded.
Department of Employment, Boys and Girls Clubs. Whoops, we're moving fast now. Salvation Army.
The action.
Local DV shelter. That's fantastic.
Coordinated entry. Oh, sorry, I'll let you keep. I'm just
no, that's fine.
I'm curious if anyone would look at question 2 and feel at liberty. You don't need to name a specific partner if you don't want to, but what's happening? Are you like, yay, these partnerships are going great, these are the differences I'm seeing, or this part of the partnership is easy, but we're bumping into these challenges? Anyone want to share successes and challenges? A little hard via chat, I guess, but you could summarize.
Getting referrals all the way through.
Yeah.
That resonates.
I did post, as you were presenting, Susie, a little bit further up in the chat, when I was working with the Indianapolis YHDP site, actually a number of the sites I worked with did referral one-pagers. And the point of that was Like some of you guys are pointing out like staff turnover, right? There's changes. How do we, so to have an intentional and organized approach to referrals, maybe you want to do a one pager that can be accessed easily and emailed to all staff. If you are working in the community, this is how you refer to the homeless education program in the district or in the COE, and vice versa. If you are working in the community and are working with families or youth who need homeless services, this is how you refer to the homeless system, or this is how, right? So it is a single page that gives clear and consistent information across partners about how to make a referral.
And I think that kind of addresses what Wendy said as well about how it seems to matter who the contact is, which is a challenge. I mentioned it at the very beginning when I talked about like systematic sharing of information so everybody knows it. But yeah, that's a real common challenge. Jessica has a countywide release of information, which is such a great idea. And I've seen that in a couple of other counties. So maybe we'll ask Jessica to email us what her countywide release looks like, in case we want to add it as a sample. Staff turnover, partner staff change. I must be behind you in the chat, Christine. Resistance to sharing homeless status with partners they don't trust. I had this conversation with someone recently about making sure that when we're talking to families, we're being very clear about our intentions for asking for certain information, and always addressing their fears about who the information is going to be shared with. I think those are two really important ways to help get families to access services when we're helping them.
There's so many good responses. Yes. I want to like dig into them all. Good. I know we don't have time to dig into them all. And it's easier when you can talk over audio. I don't know, maybe we'll do more school community partnership work in the Hetac coming up, like a community of practice. Look at me volunteering us for work, Susie, yay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and let you keep going. I'm gonna turn it back over to Christina.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk about some action stuff. Let's say you're like, this is cool. Now, I do like that Susie really framed it for us on a spectrum. So if, the county next to you is like guns a-blazing and school community partnerships are like firing on all cylinders, and you're like, I'm new to my role. How do I start? Or I'm not ready for an MOU. Just start somewhere and you can kind of move along the spectrum. So we're going to talk about some steps you can take. Well, first of all, as Susie said in her example from Pleasant Town, maybe you just want to reach out and connect, right? You meet at a meeting, or maybe you don't even meet at a meeting. Maybe you just look up, you Google local homeless coalition and decide to email the director or whatever. Someone needs to reach out to start the conversation if it hasn't already been started. So reach out and contact your partner across the aisle and have a conversation, share about your work. Ask your partners to share about theirs. You're likely going to find areas of overlap, number one. And whether this comes out in the first conversation or later in the conversation or future conversations, you're likely to find out pain points. That's kind of what you're looking for. Each partner is going to have a pain point or multiple pain points. Like, it's going really well for us in the schools working on this, but we find that, I'll give an example, at 4 p.m. on a Friday, it never fails that I'll hear from a family or a youth that they're getting evicted and they don't know where to go for the weekend. And I don't know what to do in those situations. The school's not going to be able to take care of that. So that's just a single example, but you're going to get to know about each other's work. You're going to get to know pain points, and some things are going to start to fall into place about how you might help each other. Step 2, listen to your partners and focus on efforts with mutual benefit. Susie talked about that when she talked about characteristics of strong partnerships earlier in the webinar. Most people, right, I could probably say most of you on today's call are like, I'm a homeless liaison, or I'm, a director at a shelter, or, at this organization, and time is at a premium. Resources are at a premium. We're all working really hard. And so to have a partnership be sustainable, each partner coming to the table needs to feel like there is a return on investment of the time and resources they're investing into the work. And so it's probably not going to be a sustainable partnership if I'm coming to the table, sharing all my pain points, asking you to help me address those without also then saying in return, well, what's happening on your end that I might be able to help with, right? Help each other. Also, at some point, sooner than later, you'll want to move from abstract discussion about what it means to partner to concrete action steps, right? It's very easy to, talk about partnership, yay, partnership, right? But how many of us have been part of meetings, whether it's about partnership or not, where you're like, we talked about the same thing in the last meeting. Have we gotten any further with this? Have we advanced the conversation? Have we taken steps? So at a certain point, push for some action steps. Even if it's low-hanging fruit, push for some action steps so you feel like you're starting to get traction on the time you're spending investing into partnership. In terms of action points, not a bad idea to target touch points that can build early momentum, meaning you might want to focus first on low-hanging fruit. And by low-hanging fruit, maybe you don't sit down and have your thorniest, stickiest, most challenging and complex conversation day one, right? I mean, think of it in terms of like your personal friendships. When you meet someone and they become your friend, you start with like, maybe we go out to lunch and we chit chat about the light stuff, the breezy stuff. But then as you become closer friends, then maybe you start to share more personal things, more challenging things, that type of thing. It's the same thing in professional partnerships. Start with low-hanging fruit, things you can make progress on. And then over time, as you develop trust and the relationship or the partnership deepens, you may want to take on more complex issues that might require a little bit more work and trust, but might yield more impactful results. This is important. Be savvy and strategic in messaging and engagements. And I'm going to give a couple of specific examples in a moment. So first of all, consider when you're messaging, when you're sending an email, when you're setting up a meeting, all of those things. We all kind of come to our work with our specific lenses, right? I probably would come to work with with an education lens or a school lens. But your homeless your homeless response partners are coming from their lens, your child welfare from their lens, right? We all have our lenses. So consider how your partner might view an issue and message accordingly. Also, design engagements with your partner's interests and needs in mind. I'll give you a couple of examples from YHDP. That seems to be, a common theme that's coming up. One of the YHDP sites that National Center for Homeless Education supported, I won't name the community, but someone from the continuum of care forwarded me an email and was like, I invited local liaisons in our county to this meeting and like, no one has responded, no one has registered. And I read the way that the invitation was worded and how it was shared, what would be discussed. And it was so continuum of care heavy that I was like, this is not going to be attractive to a local liaison audience. And it's not that I thought necessarily the meeting itself would not be beneficial, but if you're not messaging the work in a way that is going to resonate with your partners, help them see themselves in the work and help them feel like if I spend my time on this, because I have lots of things competing for my time, I'm going to get something out of this from my work too. Also, design your engagements with your partner's interests and needs in mind. Another example from YHDP, there would be these very customized and detailed conversations about how the homeless response portion would work. But then some communities, and I don't mean this to be like snarky, because I know every community was doing its best, and partnership work can be complex, and they had good intentions, but they'd be like, okay, and now it's time for our cross systems partnerships meeting. And it would be like every single cross system partner. So you had child welfare, juvenile justice, education, like all these different partners in a single meeting. And it felt like trying to cover too much territory across systems that operate so differently to try to have a single conversation. You weren't going to be able to advance the work. So you might, in instances like that, if you want to have multiple partners or partner systems together, maybe design your meeting where some of the plenary or group work is stuff that you want to cover with everyone. But when you need to have more detailed conversation with a particular partner, maybe do breakouts. And last but not least, partnership isn't a one-shot deal, a one conversation deal. You do want to be prepared to continue to engage and invest. So maybe establish ongoing communication with your partners across the aisle, whether it's we meet for coffee quarterly, or we're going to use a Google group with the partners that we work with to keep everyone informed easily. Also, discuss emerging issues and consider additional needed action. I think most of us can safely say, I certainly can say, I did not see COVID-19 coming, period, right? So that wasn't even on our radar a few years ago. And yet it came on the scene and disrupted so many things, changed the way human services operated. No one knew that that was going to happen, right? These issues come up periodically, and so you want to have ongoing engagements and respond to issues as they emerge. A couple of additional things about partnership. Consider how you can engage people with lived expertise, people who've actually experienced homelessness. And there are reasons for that, which I'm sharing here on the screen. So when you engage authentically with children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness in your planning and implementation of partnerships, it does a number of things. First of all, it centers the voice of people who are most impacted by homelessness in addressing the issue of homelessness in your community. Also, it elevates the perspectives of people who have lived homelessness as a credible and authoritative source of information and recommendation. They are going to know things about that experience from having experienced it that other people who haven't experienced homelessness won't know. So they will bring a valuable perspective, and it's important to elevate that perspective and communicate that is credible and valuable and an important part of the discussion. Also, it helps correct power imbalances that occur when people who have not experienced homelessness are the main decision makers for how it is addressed. That doesn't mean that people who haven't experienced homelessness and have years of experience in school and community work, it doesn't mean that we can't bring important perspectives, be a part of the work, be allies, help implement, but it just means we shouldn't be the only people doing that. A couple of considerations, and we do link to more information on the Hetac website. We do have a webpage on engaging people with lived experience, but these are a couple of considerations for engaging lived expertise in your partnership work. First of all, representation. How you might ask yourself, or your partner group might ask itself, how is our partner network ensuring representation of children, youth, and families who have been involved with or served by system partners? So like in YHDP, for example, are families who've been served by child welfare part of the discussion? Are families who've experienced homelessness and students have attended the local school system being part of that conversation? Are people who are being served by the continuum of care explaining what it was like to try to access assistance through coordinated entry, right? So how are you incorporating those voices into the work? And then how are you elevating their voices in partnership work? And that includes in planning and in decision making. So what you don't want to do is ask for people with lived experience to be part of the discussion only to, not really take what they said seriously, or not incorporate what they shared with you into how the group thinks about the work and makes decisions about moving forward. I feel like Susie probably wants to add something about this.
I do. Well, I think just what you've said and what I've referenced a couple times about checking boxes, clearly I have a thing about this, but I have watched in San Diego County a number of times really genuine, authentic efforts to engage people with lived expertise. But then when the rubber hits the road, or however you want to say it, they ask for feedback around planning and decision making. And then they hear from young people something that they didn't want to hear or weren't expecting to hear. It doesn't fit within the framework of what they were doing. And so young people end up being completely disregarded, and their feedback is disregarded. And it feels like they were invited into the conversation just so an agency could check that box and say, look, we have young people with lived expertise here. So if you it's really what Christina was saying, like really engaging with them and then being open to what they have to say. Oftentimes what young people or people with lived expertise have to say isn't always what we wanted or expected to hear, but we have to be open to that. That was it.
All right. What's the next slide? I don't remember. We stopped for questions. Oh, that's right. Okay, so what I have observed are common areas of focus when you do school community partnership work are these shown on the screen. So first of all, if you're kind of just approaching your partner for the first time, you might want to do some of what's called needs sensing. So I've worked with, for instance, Clark County, right? Las Vegas. And they're like, we have some partnerships, but it's been largely sort of ad hoc and informal. We want to have a formal partner network. How do we start? And so we did a needs sensing survey, nothing super fancy, just set up a Google form and asked people some questions about school community partnerships and about how families and students are being served and where they thought the gaps were. So you will likely see patterns emerge like, well, I don't know, could I make an example on the fly? Just like, I'm referring families to coordinated entry, but I'm hearing them say like they feel like they get lost or they never hear back. Or shelters might say, well, when we send families to some schools, it seems like everyone at that school knows how to enroll students, but then at other schools, they're getting resistance. Like you're gonna hear where some of the gaps are. A lot of times, the areas that end up being focused on are identification. Are we identifying children, youth, and families across our systems? Because we're all interacting with them, but are we actually identifying all children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness? And then referrals, right? Referrals are so key. Again, no one system can meet all the needs. So we need to know, how do we refer children, youth, and families to services across programs and partners? If I have a family at 2 p.m. on a Friday who needs help, what do I do? Or if you have a family experiencing homelessness that you are doing an intake form in through coordinated entry, are you making sure they get referred to school? Do you know how to do that? And then delivering coordinated and comprehensive services. This is a little bit more vague, but what we heard a lot in YHDP is youth are like, I feel like I'm navigating a complex and disjointed system. It feels like no one knows anyone else. Like I might get a phone number, but then it feels like I'm in a whole different world once I call that number. And that's probably not a good feeling to have. So anything that school and community partners can do to make clients feel like we are talking to one another and we are working together. You're not operating, you know, in 17 or navigating 17 different disconnected systems. Also staying informed about new legislation, opportunities, and funding stream. Perfect example, American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children and Youth Fund. They include the option for school districts to contract with community-based organizations, probably a conversation people would like to have, right? Or when, you know, California appropriated funds for college-based rapid rehousing. It was great that there was already a partnership group between higher education and youth homeless response to hit the ground running on that. Of course, engaging people with lived experience, looking at issues of inequity across your system. Who are we serving? What are their outcomes? And maintaining a connected and active partner network that you can tap into at any time. We summarized a number of things. We wanted to make it, you know, a little bit more concrete. Susie has done a lot of work on partnership in San Diego. And in fact, that's how Susie and I really started to work more closely together, as I was her education technical assistance provider for San Diego's YHDP work. So I can vouch for the fact that Susie walks the talk. So she's going to tell you about that, what that was like and has been like for her in San Diego.
Thank you, Christina. So I'm going to spotlight a partnership that exists in San Diego that I was part of founding, I guess would be the word, called the San Diego Youth Homelessness Consortium. So the consortium, well, I'll just tell you what it is first. So it's a collaborative entity made up of a variety of stakeholders designed to increase the effectiveness of the service delivery system in San Diego County for youth experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. We have a website. There's a link to it on the slide. So it's a very formal, you can see we have like a mission statement, we have a website. It's a very formalized group, but it didn't start out that way. So I'll just tell you a tiny bit in the beginning. There were a couple of different groups that were meeting around youth homelessness. One of them, some of you might remember if you've been around a while, was an unaccompanied youth task force. Those were originally started by NACY, I want to say like 10, 13 years ago, a while back. And San Diego had one, and I was a part of that unaccompanied youth task force. And then our Continuum of Care started a youth homelessness subcommittee. And so there were some people that were attending that meeting. But I was starting to have, my meeting was fizzling out. Not a lot of people were coming. It was the same people going to both meetings. So I had a conversation with the person who chaired the subcommittee at the COC, and we decided to combine our groups right around the same time that the COC was deciding against having a youth homelessness subcommittee. Which is a whole other conversation I'm sure we all could have about our COCs not wanting to recognize youth very often. But so we joined up, and we just weren't getting response. The meetings, I think, had been on such a fizzle for a while that the community had kind of lost. They weren't getting a return on their investment of spending time coming to the meeting. Nothing was in it for them. So anyway, the Youth Homelessness Consortium was actually born. I went out to lunch with the lead from the other group, and we had kind of disbanded our meeting, and we were talking about what to do. And I want to say the start of it was, I know that there was something that I was looking for in my community, a place where there was a voice on behalf of young people experiencing homelessness that I didn't realize didn't exist until I went through this situation. I just thought I wasn't finding it. But what ended up happening was I realized it didn't exist. So that's when we decided that we would revamp the whole thing. And we started the consortium. We sent out a new invitation to all of the contacts that we knew. Like Christina mentioned, we were really specific with how we worded it, with what we wanted to do. We tried to craft a hopeful message about, the needs of homeless youth in our community and working together, and just really came at it with that positive, like goodwill, intentional attitude. And since 2018, which is when it started, we have grown to, we actually have over 50 agencies that participate in the consortium. So it's really every major stakeholder in San Diego County is involved. And some of them are housing providers, some of them are mental health providers, some of them are legal services. We have all kinds of agencies that are involved in the consortium. And what that lends us is a voice. When we go forward, and I'll tell you a little bit on the next slide about some of the stuff we've been able to do, when we want to speak on something that's happening in San Diego County, if the consortium wants to make a statement, we have a louder voice because we are speaking on behalf of over 50 agencies involved in the work of homeless youth. And that was really the goal. One of the goals that we had going into it was like, how do we get a louder voice for youth in this county? Because up until that point, it really didn't feel like they had one, and it didn't feel like the status quo was really attempting to meet their needs. So there is a full structure to what we do. We have a charter. There's a membership agreement. Membership is free, but we have people sort of sign up to be a member. The group has a steering committee that really does a lot of the work around what we're sharing with people, what we're working on, how we're trying to help the system. There's different work groups around how San Diego County is collecting data. There's a youth voice network, and there's a group centered around our coordinated community plan to end youth homelessness. So that's really, like, in a nutshell, what it looks like. So I just decided to give you a little example, kind of following the spectrum from like how it started to what we're able to do now. So like at the networking level, it really was just some concerned stakeholders that got together, wanted to share information, wanted to make sure we knew each other and how to work together and figure out like what the needs were in our area and where the gaps were. And when we did that, we realized the gap was really, you know, a group like ours that had a voice and had some pull. And that's when we decided we should create a more formal structure. The ways, especially in the beginning, that we did some cooperation together centered around Runaway and Homeless Youth Month, we combined activities and events. We have all provided each other with letters of support when writing grant applications. That's a common need that comes up. We're trying to bring dollars into the county for homeless youth, and so we support each other's applications. And support for schools increased during this time, especially during COVID. Identification became a large issue during COVID, as many of you are aware, and it was very easy for me to get information out through our email listserv about, like, if you have new families showing up, they, you know, here's what you need to know about their schooling, here's where you can get help. I was able to get that info out quickly and effectively through the consortium system. And then at the coordination level, partners have applied jointly for grant applications, the Emergency Solutions Grant. There's HAP funds that were applied for jointly. There are contracts that partners have gone in together and able to help coordinate and leverage services for youth. And then at the collaboration level, we did collaborate, as I mentioned, on the YHDP grant. It's how I was able to get money from YHDP. San Diego County was funded in round 2, so we were really early in the funding process, early in the application, and so I have the pleasure of being able to say that San Diego County was the first education institution to get money from HUD, to bring in HUD money to an education institution. But that was largely because my application was in a joint application with homeless service providers. And we did that through the consortium. There was a group of providers that decided they didn't want to compete with each other for the money. They'd rather figure out a way to get money and all work together. And that benefits our community. We partnered on the community plan to end youth homelessness. We issued a guidance document around youth engagement activities and recommendations to the community, how not to tokenize your young people with lived expertise, how to not disregard them, which we talked about earlier. And then one of the things that I've been most happy that the consortium has been able to do is really have an impact on funding decisions that have been made in San Diego. Particularly, there was a contract, there was funding that went to the County of San Diego, and they created a program called Housing Our Youth with the money. I can't remember if it was HEAP or HAP. And they set up this whole amazing system for housing young people. And then they wrote in their policies that young people who had been in foster care would be prioritized in the system. And absolutely agree that young people who are alumni of foster care often end up homeless, and that's a serious situation. But the values of the consortium are that one type of homeless youth shouldn't be prioritized over another. And there are many homeless youth that aren't alumni of foster care and don't have as many options available to them in that way. So we spoke up at a Board of Supervisors meeting about our disagreement with that portion of the plan, and the County of San Diego changed it and took it out of the plan. And so that's just one example of how we were able to get an outcome, because we have a larger voice now than like one person from one agency showing up at a Board of Supervisors meeting to say they disagree with something. We can show up and say the whole community of youth providers disagrees with this. And so we are able to like move the needle every once in a while, which has been very cool. We also had some say in the revision of the youth scoring tool in our youth coordinated entry system. And we've done a lot of work on data. So that is like a really quick overview around what the Youth Homelessness Consortium has been able to do in San Diego. It started small and it really has grown. It's been 5 years now, I think, that the consortium's been going. And so we're really proud of what we've been able to do together, but it's also really opened up a lot of opportunities for me to work with various partners. And the consortium is kind of what we have in common. Do we have any questions or comments about that? I think we have a question coming up on the next slide, Christina.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, as people are hopefully typing in the Q&A or chat, Jeannie from Orange County did mention new statewide funding for community schools. Partner with the COE to find out which LEAs in your county have received a planning or implementation grant. The funding is for 5 years, and maybe some of the tools in our school community partnership toolkit might help support that work.
Mm-hmm.
If we have time, Susie, when we get to the point where you talk about the toolkit, maybe you'll just let me tour the inventory, because I feel like people are asking a lot of questions, and showing them where they can find that information might be helpful. But
yes,
back to you.
So I don't know if anybody wants to chime in with like a key takeaway or a next step that you're planning on taking. This is kind of brings us to the end of the content of the webinar, and then we'll take you to the toolkit really quick so you can see that as well. But I would love to hear if anybody is like decided on like their next step that they're going to take. Give it a minute for people to type it in or think about it. Mindful of the verbiage when reaching out to agencies. Yeah, that's such a good one. Such a good one. Implementation grant. Oh, yes. So the implementation, Jamie, are you referring to a YHDP? Christina?
I think he means the community schools one that Jeannie was talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yes, community schools. Fantastic. That's fantastic. You will probably appreciate the partner inventory in the toolkit as well. No one system. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Spectrum is helpful for somebody. Okay, I'm going to do, you guys keep going, but I'm going to do a new share. Do you want me to share the toolkit, Christina, or do you want to go through it?
Actually, do you mind if I take the first shot at it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if it'll let me share.
Let me
share.
Really quick.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Oops. I'm just going to say, oh, how do I share my whole screen? See that now I'm going to mess it up. Hold on. Let me try this again. Share screen. I just want to share my whole screen. Can I do that? It's saying whiteboard. That makes no sense. Okay. Can you see when I go over here? Can you see the school community partnerships? Nope.
No.
Why is it only letting me do a whiteboard? Hold on a second. Let me try one more time. If I can't get it right, then there it is. Okay. So this is actually the toolkit, right? And you get a little bit of an about the toolkit, but then we have we have about, I don't know, 8 different modules to the toolkit. So first of all, we've got the understanding federal definitions. That is an issue that once you start getting into cross systems work, you're likely to bump into. So if you're like, everybody keeps talking about the HUD definition, what is that? Or what's the difference between the different definitions? Which programs use these definitions? So for instance, Head Start and federal child care subsidies use the education definition of homeless. So it's just sort of a lay of the land with the definition. Navigating different definitions are some of those strategies like, okay, what do we do? We're working in a multi-definition environment. How do we navigate that? So it's a strategy document. If you want more information about the legislative requirements for collaboration across partner systems, right? The McKinney-Vento Act, the Child Care Act, Head Start, Runaway and Homeless Youth, all of those. You can see a list of those requirements in more detail. We do provide you with a slide deck that you can customize. Let's say you're starting the conversation on school community partnerships and you're like, give me some slides I can pick and choose from. We've got that for you. And they resemble some of the slides that we shared today. Remember how Susie walked you through the partnerships along a spectrum? You can get all of that full spectrum and what it looks like in different activities you might work on at each level of that partnership spectrum, with the purpose being, do what you can and advance your partnerships as much as you can, but start somewhere and just maybe look at what it would mean to go to the next step. Then I'll show you the inventory in a minute if I can get it. So I'll show you the actual inventory so you can see how it works. And then we do have a resource here on creating a partnership organization charter, like Susie with SDYHC, how they went about. You can actually see their sample charter or also a sample memorandum of understanding, including some links to other examples of MOUs. Let's say you're scheduling a meeting. We've got a template in there for you that I've used in some of the school community partnership networks, a standard agenda with things like, welcome and introductions, who we are and why we meet, education partner spotlight, community partner spotlight, focal topic, and then pre and post meeting task lists to help you sort of plan and stay organized. And then we link to our webpage with more information about engaging people with lived experience, including topics such as developing a shared mission, building a healthy and inclusive culture, and compensation. Now, here's where I'm worried if I do this, do you see the toolkit or do you still see the webpage? Still see the webpage.
Still see the webpage.
Okay, let me try a new share. Here we go. I'm getting better at this. Okay, so when you open up the inventory, this is what it looks like. It is an Excel spreadsheet. It just kind of explains to you what it's for. And as you can see down at the bottom, there are different tabs for your different partners, because as you build partnerships, you might want to know how to find quickly, like, who was that person in higher ed in the basic needs program? I forgot. You don't want to look through 3 pages of contacts, right? So you organize your contacts by partner system. And we did leave you and you can customize any of this, right? This is a customizable, this is an editable document. Workforce, mental and behavioral health, other community partners. Maybe this is where you put your nonprofit, or if you have a really strong partnership with public benefits, you change this here. But what I want to make sure you know how to use is the Finding Partners tab. So we give you a list by system: possible early care and education partners, possible K-12 partners, right? Possible partners from all the different systems, and then where to look. So let's talk about higher ed. Higher ed and basic needs in California is compared to other states, is pretty well developed. So of course, you're going to ask your existing partners, who are you working with in higher ed? So it can be a recommendation from your existing partners. But also, hey, I've heard there are homeless education single points of contact in the community college system. Well, this is where you can find it out. You can find it out in their liaison directory, which probably now is not going to work. It's not going to let you see that because I just clicked a link and it's only letting me share one thing at a time. Here, I'm going to do a new share. So this is where it takes you to, right? The California Community Colleges Homeless Youth Liaisons Directory. You can view that resource and you can look and see all right, who's the person in the community college near me, right? You can find out who that person is, drop their contact information in the inventory. And it's similar with other systems, right? So who are your local liaisons? Who is your, can we find out if there's a TRIO, right? A TRIO program in my community. So these are the different links. Who is the continuum of care in my community? Who are the runaway and homeless youth? I'm going to try this again to give one more example. Now I'm going to have to do a different share, I think. So it'll take you to this map of grantees of Runaway and Homeless Youth Act providers. You'll click on California. Let's see who those providers are. You're going to be able to look. Oh, look, Volunteers of America in LA, right? So you can just go and look and see who your providers are and add them to your inventory. Susie, I'm going to stop sharing in case you wanted to tour anything else. I know we only have a couple of minutes, but anything else you wanted to share from the toolkit?
I'm going to go ahead. I think you did a good job. I want to make sure I get the evaluation QR code up since we only have like 2 minutes left. And thank everyone for being here and for your questions and your conversation. And there's also a link to, so you can use the QR code for the eval, or you can use the link in the chat right now. But otherwise, thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks for joining. Hope this was helpful information. And I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Susie, you can drop yours in the chat if you have questions.
And we will send a copy of the slide deck and a link to the video out next week to everybody who registered for today's webinar.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.